Okay, so welcome everyone. Thank you so much for being here at Adult Forum. It is very strange to be speaking in front of a crowd of people without a mask on. But hey, this is exciting. I've not been able to be in front of people for quite some time, other than one class presentation that I did. So this is very exciting. Thank you so much for being here and allowing me this opportunity. Today's lecture is about the topic I've been working on for my master's thesis. And if you'd like to read the full thesis whenever it's completed, it's almost done. I will be turning it in early next week. So if you would like to read the full thing, if this topic intrigues you, please let me know either after the session or you can shoot me an email. My email address is available on the chapel's website, and I'll also drop it in the chat at the end of the lecture. So as y'all are aware, we are on Duke University campus, a harbinger of learning known for its academic rigor and excellence. Thus, in order to meet the intellectual tenacity head on, I'd like to start with an illustration from the prodigious philosopher SpongeBob SquarePants. A famous episode of SpongeBob SquarePants called Patty Hype begins with a disheveled character crawling into the Krusty Krab restaurant. He explains that he hasn't eaten in 3 days. And after making sure that the character has money to pay, Mr. Krabs, the owner of the restaurant, brings him some food. The starving character looks at the food and says, "Where's the pizzazz? He looks around at the place and he says, look at this place. What's the theme here? Underwater? It's boring." He refuses the food, crawls away, and cries out, "Food, water, atmosphere." This scene illustrates how one does not simply engage with objects directly. Or, in many instances, we do not even desire the object alone. One also is aware of the methods and the environment in which one acquires the object and the ways of relating to objects or other people in particular spaces. Food is not simply acquired on its own, but rather within a particular space, setting, and environment. In other words, an atmosphere. This surplus enjoyment beyond the object itself takes place within a surplus space of atmosphere, which we can define as a phenomenon that emerges from the entanglement and interrelation of subject, object, and material environment of a particular space that happens when a sentient subject engages with a material environment. So back to the SpongeBob example, the starving character seems to presume that the operators of the restaurant have some sense of agency in creating the atmosphere, which is an intuition reflected in the common phrases used by people to talk about atmospheres. For example, we have the common phrase that an individual needs to set the mood. Perhaps you're at like a fancy restaurant and I've had waiters come around and it's nighttime, maybe you're outside and the waiter comes around with a little the lighter and says, "Here, let me set the mood for you," and lights a candle and then kind of influences the atmosphere of the meal. And this might, this phrase, setting the mood, it might imply that one needs to change something about the lighting, something about the sound, the colors, or the various ambiances that exist within the space. But the phrase holds within itself the connotation that atmospheres are both subjective in that they can be felt by sentient creatures or subjects, persons. And at the same time, they are objective because they can be manipulated and transformed within a particular space outside of the subject It's, lighting the candle, this type of exterior object to yourself that transforms your emotional experience and the way that you relate to it, the kind of subjective feelings that you have about that space. And so upon further reflection, we see that atmospheres end up being this really weird and fascinating thing that exists simultaneously as subjective and objective. The father of contemporary atmospheric studies is a philosopher from Germany named Gernot Burma. I had 4 semesters of German in my undergraduate at Baylor, and I have absolutely no idea if I'm pronouncing that name right. So I am letting down all of my professors, but we're going to go with Burma. So I'm sorry if anyone watching this is highly offended by my terrible pronunciation. But as he observed, atmospheres are able to exist and be manipulated within an objective space, but they are unable to exist without emotive, sentient creatures to experience them. So in this sense, they are both spatial and emotional, combining these two qualities in a type of virtual surplus of atmosphere. So we can study atmospheres objectively by looking at the agents and material objects that produce them, such as if we were to look around this room and point out the lighting. What type of lighting exists within this room? Is it a warm lighting? Is it a harsh lighting? This one makes me think of, kind of a doctor's office type of lighting. It's very procedural, very
classroom light.
Classroom lighting. Yeah. It's not very warm. Imagine if it had more of like a yellow kind of tint to it, though. It'd be a little bit warmer, calming, more inviting. We can look at the chairs that exist in this room. How are the arrangement of seating? What kind of power dynamics does that invoke, right? Like I have a lot of power right now in this room by virtue of the way that the seats are organized. We can look at like the coloring. It's got some blues, but it is a lot of white. Admittedly, I'm not a fan of the atmosphere in this room, but it's like a lot of, it's just white walls, these like really bright white lights.
Pictures.
Yeah, but there's also, thank you.
Classrooms have just walls,
Right. They have pictures, and what are those pictures of? I think it's of like the Durham area, right? So it's this kind of imagery, which is actually somewhat fitting for like or it's an interesting choice for a divinity school. One might think initially, it'd be, religious imagery on the walls, but instead we have imageries of the surrounding community to which the students are meant to serve. So that's a really interesting type of atmospheric communication, in that whenever you're in this classroom and learning about theology, learning about the Bible, learning about Christianity, you're doing so with these types of visual cues, that it's not just meant for you alone, but you're doing so with a broader community in mind. At least that's one interpretation of how the atmosphere in this room might work. But we also have to look at atmospheres subjectively. So we can kind of do a taxonomy of all the different material objects and colors within this room. But we also have to look at ourselves and our own individual experience of how this atmosphere makes us feel. And some of that is going to be kind of subjective based on personal histories and desires and so forth. And Burma has a great illustration of how all of this works. To kind of give another concrete example, he talks about stage design, like in theater. He talks about that as a type of atmospheric craft, if you will. So if you talk with a professional stage designer in theater, or like a production designer in film, right? Films are incredibly atmospheric forms of art. So these stage designers will know how to arrange space and setting in ways that help communicate the emotional climate of the scene taking place. And so if atmospheres didn't have some sort of objective, I was about to say science, that's not the right word, but if they didn't have some sort of objective quality about them, then we just wouldn't be able to do things like stage design. You walk up to a stage designer and be like, okay, in this scene, the characters are in love. And they'd be like, I have no idea how to communicate that in an atmosphere. But that's silly. We do know these things. The way you set up the way you set up a stage for a romantic scene is very different than how you would do it for a scary scene, right? We can understand, the here you have Romeo and Juliet, the other, which is, the classic romantic type of stage setting, the atmosphere, romantic passion. And then the other one is Stanley Kubrick's The Shining, one of the most famous, scary scenes in film history, where you have this kind of recurring liminal space, and the way that he sets up the camera makes this like really eerie, unsettling type of atmosphere of coming across two figures at the end of a hallway in a strange space that shouldn't be there, and you don't know how they got there. And so yes, we can tell, there is a different type of atmosphere being created that is able to communicate these different emotional reactions. And so you have the objective kind of stage or setting that is created in an external space, but you also have the subjective experience of what the stage communicates, which can vary with each individual based upon personal differences. So to summarize what we've said so far, atmospheres are produced and maintained by agents. When we talked about in the SpongeBob example, why is your restaurant set up like this? You should have done better. So they're produced and maintained by agents. They provide emotional qualities to space. They are both objective and subjective, and they can influence how we relate to objects or people within that space. Atmosphere is a phenomenon that plays an important role in influencing one's imagination and perception of the space that one inhabits. An atmosphere can thus create a coordination between mind, body, and space. As one research article said, an atmosphere, quote, becomes a way of performing both what the world is and should be. The provided imagination, perception, and performance of an atmosphere prepares the heart, if you will, or primes the pump for certain experiences. They influence how we perceive different objects within space, and they can influence the way that we even navigate throughout spaces. For example, in certain rooms, they'll use lighting. So like right now, we kind of have full lighting in the room. It's meant to be bright, meant to keep you awake. But then there's also this sense of it's a learning environment. So the lighting exists. It's there for you to be able to take notes if you wanted, but it also enables a type of conversation. So like in a moment, whenever I ask questions, there's a little bit more even of a power dynamic. I can clearly see you. You don't feel like you're lost in the shadows. Those are kind of atmospheric techniques that exist that influence how we relate to the space. So imagine if all of the lights where y'all are sitting were turned off and you just have a bunch of stage lights on me. This would end up being more of a theater. And it might make people a little less hesitant to ask questions or to speak comments or things like that. But atmospheres, through these types of techniques of changing or at least influencing the way that we relate to space, they increase our connection to the surrounding environments. And so they kind of get inside us, if that makes sense, or if you prefer a different type of analogy, they bring us outside of ourselves into the surrounding space. And so by having the ability to get inside people or to take people into them, atmospheres can induce mood or influence our kind of emotions and our mood. And they have the power to change emotions, or in many cases, they encourage certain dispositions toward desired actions, making those actions feel right or proper within a given space. So in this sense, atmosphere can be an unconscious formulator of desire. One of the most classic examples of this, as I chose in the picture here, is like the shopping mall, right? It's this kind of atmosphere that can, the way that there's been different analyses done of shopping malls, that the atmosphere is set up in a way that causes one to be more prone toward buying commodities. Now, it's not like you just go in and buy absolutely everything, but it is in general, it makes you more prone to buy certain commodities. Or one might think back to our SpongeBob SquarePants example. The atmosphere was boring and uninviting. And so it made the food appear less desirable. But if the atmosphere was more aesthetically pleasing, then perhaps it could have had the opposite effect, causing the food to appear more desirable than what it is. You can kind of trick people. Like if you have, you can have like just normal quality of food, but really, rev up the atmosphere of your restaurant, and people be like, oh, this is pretty fancy. Like, not to throw this restaurant under the bus, but like Olive Garden does this, right? You go into Olive Garden and it's like, oh, this is a fancy place. Look at the atmosphere in here. And then like the food it's not bad, but it's just like average quality food, but the atmosphere makes it feel so much, grander than what it is. So like restaurants know this. Advertisement and brand marketing is another example of this. Tests have been done where, for example, you can put the exact same apple slices into a normal bag and into like a McDonald's bag, like a little Ziploc baggie, or into a bag that has like the McDonald's logo on it. And children will say that the apples in the McDonald's bag taste better, even though they're literally like cut from the same apple. So there's no empirical difference. And they've done similar things with, this isn't just children, they've done similar things with like Coca-Cola and adults. You can just put like, the same off-brand soda into like 3 different bottles. And if you put like the Coca-Cola logo on it, they'll say it tastes better based on kind of like this nostalgic factor of like, oh, I remember drinking this at my family, barbecue or something like that. So atmosphere can transform how we relate to the spaces around us. Now, I say this, and to be clear, atmospheres do not merely determine all emotions or behaviors that happen, okay, right? They don't turn us into complete automatons and we lose all autonomy and are just like robots walking around within a particular space as soon as we encounter an atmosphere. Of course, some responses to an environment will be a little more universal. So like if a sudden loud noise went off in here, or if I just, with this technology that's set up in the room, if I just turned the volume up one little notch, we would have this awful feedback sound that sounds like demons screeching at us. And it would produce within all of us a very unsettling atmosphere. So that's a little bit more universal. But there are important exceptions and differences to how we respond to atmospheres based upon individual cultural and historical variation. So, one cannot, for example, you cannot make someone else fall in love simply by lighting candles and playing a Kenny G record, despite how many times one might try. There must be a prior emotional disposition within the two subjects, in this case, a prior romantic connection that is then fostered by the atmosphere rather than created out of nothing. So such dispositions are formed in the broader context of narratives, related past experiences, culture, habits, character, and ideology. Nonetheless, atmospheres can, in some circumstances, produce effects within subjects that they did not initially plan, because atmospheres I kind of like this analogy, this language right now. My thesis advisor might tell me that it's wrong, but we'll go with this for the time being. Atmospheres sort of increase the agency in the material environment as well, if that makes sense. So like we have our own kind of agency in relating to a space, but atmospheres can kind of make the space more powerful, if that makes sense. And so, for example, people have the experience, back again with the malls. They have experience of going to the store, and we've all done this, and purchasing more items than what they intended because certain commodities look enticing within the store's atmosphere. And then maybe you get home and you realize like, this isn't as cool as I thought it was. I don't know why I bought this. We've all done that before, though this will not always be the case. And what enticed you might be different than the Kenny G records that enticed me. So I will, like the title of this essay, or the title of this lecture is A Theology of Sacred Atmosphere. So you're probably expecting me to talk about church at some point. But before we do that, I do want to ask, do we have any questions or need of clarification? I know I just threw a lot of information at you about weird phenomenological philosophies of space. But are there any questions or need for clarification? Oh, are we good? Is it making sense so far? Kind of. Okay, good. That's the nice thing about this study is, despite how many weird technical terms I throw at people, most of us kind of have an intuitive understanding of atmosphere just because we experience it so much. So as soon as you just put the name on it, everyone's like, oh yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. So that is the fun thing is like lay persons and, just at your average Joe would already have a really good understanding of this at kind of a basic level. So that's been the most fun for me in this study is we're about to talk about this now, but like any church that I went to, or just, talking to lay persons or talking to people in my home church, and they're like, what are you studying? And I say atmosphere. And I mention a few things, and then they immediately start like, oh, yeah. And then they start analyzing the atmosphere and are pointing out things about their church service I didn't even think of initially. And so it's so cool to see how people kind of already understand this and are just like, maybe just need the word atmosphere and then, yes. So it's fun being able to talk about this subject because like I feel as if, it shows how smart the normal person is. It's really great. So what I'd like to do now is to take a theological turn and ask, how does atmosphere get applied to a church? What is it that transforms a normal atmosphere into one that is sacred? So to begin with, it's important that we maintain, I believe, and this might sound weird at first, but I believe that it's important for us to maintain a distinction between an atmosphere and God, or like the presence of the Holy Spirit. I know that sounds weird, like, Nathaniel, why are you trying to get God out of our churches? And that's not what I'm saying. What I mean is that we should be hesitant about equating a church atmosphere with the work of the Holy Spirit. And I have a few reasons for this, as I put in the PowerPoint. First, I copy and pasted from my thesis. So you haven't read it, but as this thesis is already established, atmospheres exist or as we've already talked about, they exist in both secular and sacred spaces. And I don't think it would be wise for Christians to assume that the basic workings of an atmosphere just stop and cease in worship spaces, being overtaken entirely by the Holy Spirit without any influence from other agents or a material environment. Atmospheres are just a basic part of how architecture functions, including church architecture. So I think it's important for us to acknowledge that reality. Second, by understanding the role that atmospheres play within worship services, I believe that churches will be better equipped to think theologically about the construction of their atmospheres. It kind of, it's a charge of like, okay, we need to be responsible for what we are doing and how we are influencing the atmospheres that are created within our services. And likewise, it should keep the church from assuming that in like the opposite way, that atmosphere alone is sufficient without the operation of the Holy Spirit. It requires churches to like really pray and seek for God's guidance and in the presence of the Holy Spirit. And third, keeping a distinction between atmosphere and the Holy Spirit helps guard against manipulation. So I discussed this more in my written thesis, if you want to read more about that. But to summarize, religious fervor and ecstatic experiences can, in some instances, be engineered through atmospheric means. There's a whole, not science of this, but there is, certain strategies that one can do to generate ecstasy. And in dangerous circumstances, the atmosphere can bring predisposed subjects. So, and by that, I mean like those with the dispositions, desires, beliefs, and history that agree with and are ready to accept that which the atmosphere communicates. So the atmosphere can bring those types of persons to an extreme state of fervor by means of shame, fear-mongering, and what I call like grotesque techniques. So maybe like very violent and gory stories, or there's other instances that I've seen in church of pastors using really off-color and just gross sorts of humor. This is mean, but think Mark Driscoll and the Mars Hill Church podcast, if you've been listening to that from Christianity Today. And so then you can generate these types of fervorous affects, as I call them. And in some circumstances, churches will then equate that to the work of the Holy Spirit, which can be dangerously manipulative, I think, and something of a hot topic for that you hear talked about in circles where there are people who have left the faith. Or another illustration might be, this is popular kind of more back in like I think around like the 80s. But you would have kind of like the rapture sermons, and they had all these movies. There's so many different series. Like the original was a Thief in the Night series, or the Apocalypse series from the 90s. There's also a series of films made by a former like grindhouse exploitation filmmaker who became a Christian and then teamed up with a pastor, and they made these films called The Burning Hell, or like If Footmen Tire You, What Will Horses Do? And it's this like communist scare film / Christian apocalyptic movie about how this is in like the 70s. So they're like, communists are just going to walk into America and commit a mass genocide against all Christians. And it was like this film was filled with all this like really, really gory, grotesque imagery, and or like The Burning Hell, where it's like filled with all these possible depictions about the ways you'll be tortured in hell if you don't accept Christ. And they would make these to be shown in churches, and just to like scare people out of their minds. And then like these people would be terrified, and they'd say, that's the Holy Spirit, definitely, making you feel convicted right now because you're bad. And I don't think that's true. It's the goodness of God, I think, that leads people to repentance. There is no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear, rather than generates fear. But anyways, so I think that for those types of considerations, it's important for all Christians to kind of keep a distinction between atmosphere and work of the Holy Spirit. So that way we're a little bit better at catching those types of things. So maybe if you're in a church service and you're feeling maybe the pastor said something or done something, and you like are maybe feeling a ton of shame, like a ton of like, oh, I really hate myself right now, or like a lot of fear. Hopefully we'll be able to stop and think, wait a second, is that actually God trying to get me to like hate myself or be like really, really ashamed? Or is this something within the atmosphere that's influencing that? We already learned about the agency and about the agencies of humans and material environments in producing atmospheres. And many of those principles translate to religious spaces and atmospheres as well. So humans are involved in constructing and maintaining sacred spaces. But I think what ultimately makes an atmosphere sacred, maybe with like a capital S, if you will, is when God's own agency and grace appropriates the atmosphere to make God's glory known and to help God's people become more holy. In this sense, a sacred atmosphere is a site of disclosure for God's beauty, goodness, glory, and it points us back to God's self-revelation in Jesus Christ as Lord. So to kind of summarize the formula that I give within the thesis, and again, if you want more about this, I can't fully develop it for the sake of time, or if we have if you're really curious, maybe you can ask me during the Q&A, but I do develop this more in the thesis. I'll summarize the formula though. God's special act of grace appropriates the creaturely medium of atmosphere for God's own ends. This appropriation then contradicts the perhaps the idolatrous or like the sinful modes of being that we carry into the church space. And then God expropriates a new holiness within the body of Christ. So it kind of had, and I get that formulation from one of my favorite theologians and philosophers, Jacques Ellul, who is influenced by Karl Barth on this, but that kind of 3 steps to the revelation of like divine appropriation, contradiction, and expropriation. So I apply that to atmosphere in my thesis. But to consider a brief objection that one might have, we could perhaps ask why sacred atmosphere is even an appropriate concept at all, given that God is omnipresent and thus present to every space. So like, God is everywhere. And, so why would one particular space end up being more sacred than another if God is everywhere and God is God? There's not one part of God that's more sacred than another part. God doesn't have parts. And I believe that the answer is that sacred atmospheres help believers contextualize, properly understand, and interpret how God is present, the nature and character of God's presence, which can inform one's understanding of God's presence to creation as a whole. So atmospheres, I believe, serve a vital pedagogical function for teaching the church about the character of God's presence. Does that make sense? So in my thesis, I have accounts for how to understand this sacred presence of atmospheres, both Christologically and pneumatologically. And by that, I mean how Christ is present in sacred atmospheres and how the Holy Spirit is present in sacred atmospheres. So kind of like to summarize that point, which again, you'll just have to, this is really, this whole thing is just a pitch for you to read my thesis. This is pure commercialism and propaganda. No, but you'll have to read my thesis for a more in-depth explanation. But to kind of summarize, what we talked about is atmospheres are produced and maintained by agents. And so, like, the most important agent of a sacred atmosphere would be the Holy Spirit. And I also talk about the way in my thesis that spaces of suffering and mourning, like vigils, or the bridge at Selma, Alabama, or the street corner where George Floyd was murdered, those can end up becoming sacred atmospheres as well. And they can end up being kind of appropriated by God to teach us about the way that God is present to those who suffer and mourn and experience tragedy. But briefly, I would like to end this lecture with kind of the main point of my thesis. And so, like, if you're taking notes, or if you're mentally taking notes, this is kind of like the core formula that I'd like you to walk away with. And it's what I call the telos of sacred atmosphere. Telos is a Greek term, or a term in philosophy that refers to the goal or the purpose of something. So, like, the end as contrasted to the means, a means to an end, the end being the telos. So the telos of sacred atmosphere, I believe, is to encourage Christians to love God, love one's neighbor as oneself, and to love all creation. I think that's pretty simple and easy to remember. And whenever we're analyzing atmospheres, or if we're ministers and we're thinking about how, to set up and maintain the kind of atmospheres within our church, I believe that this should be the kind of the primary thing that we're thinking of. Okay, how does our atmosphere encourage people to love God? How does our atmosphere encourage people to love their neighbor? And how does it encourage people to love all creation? All three of these points are found within Scripture and the broader Christian tradition. For instance, there is Jesus's teaching in Mark 12 that the greatest commandments are to love God with all your heart and love your neighbor as yourself. And the point about loving creation is also derived from passages like the creation account in Genesis 1 and 2, Isaiah chapter 11, Romans chapter 8, and the Christ hymn in Colossians chapter 1. And there's a great summary of how these verses get applied to the Christian life from Francis Schaeffer in his book Pollution and the Death of Man, which is, I don't agree with everything that he says in that book, but it is a good book. And I do recommend it, especially right now as we're facing kind of climate changes. It's a little bit dated and, because it was written many decades ago, but it's a great book on kind of like a Christian reclaiming the sacredness of creation. But he says this: on the basis of the fact that there is going to be total redemption in the future, not only of man, but of all creation, the Christian who believes the Bible should be the man who, with God's help and in the power of the Holy Spirit, is treating nature now in the direction of the way nature will be then. Our actions now will not be perfect, but there should be something substantial, or we have missed our calling. I love that quote. So you can see how, this view of the total redemption of all things influences how we need to act within the present in relationship to creation, which fulfills kind of that third aspect that I talked about of how sacred atmosphere encourages us to love all creation. And so if a church service has constructed their atmosphere in a way that inhibits the encouragement of one of those categories, love of God or love of neighbor or love of all creation, then I believe that church is not living into its full calling. And I believe that adjustments would have to be made to that type of atmosphere. So in my thesis, again, to give an advertisement, but in my thesis, or maybe this is a bad advertisement because you're, oh gosh, I don't want to read that. I have about 20 pages dedicated to a dense analysis of what is called the worship concert atmosphere.
Wow.
Where it's becoming increasingly popular for some churches to adopt the form of a secular music concert atmosphere in order to express the content of Christian worship. Now, this is not necessarily like a, contemporary church service versus a, more traditional church service dichotomy. I in my field research this summer, I went to a different church every Sunday in my local hometown in Texas. And there were a few contemporary worship churches that I did visit that did not have this worship concert atmosphere. So I do want to clarify that this is not just me throwing anyone that doesn't have high church liturgy under the bus. That's not the case. And there was even a more traditional church that I visited that did use the worship concert, which is a very weird, it was very strange. So this is something that's kind of independent of that contemporary traditional split. And so to hint at what I say in my thesis, I think that the problem of the worship concert is not with the contemporary worship as such, or not that, but this kind of new development in which we are darkening entire sanctuaries, which is what's done. All the lights are turned off in the room except for some stage lights that are shining on the platform where the worship team is singing, or occasionally the space will be flooded with some just neon lights. So all the lights are turned off except for some maybe some neon pink lights, or kind of bathe everyone in a color. But the space will also be flooded with smoke machines and laser beams and this thing called movers. So rotating lights that shine color blotches onto the ceiling. And this is mean, but they do, well, it's not mean because they do this. They hit you in the eyes throughout service. So you'll be chilling. Then that's just what they do, because they pan over the audience as well. And again, this kind of neon lights flooding. And in these worship services, you can you can't see your neighbor. You can maybe see the person sitting right next to you, but someone who's just in, right over there in the pew, you can't make them out. It's so dark, and then the neon lights have completely bathed them. They are almost unrecognizable. So you can't see your neighbors other than maybe the 2 or 3 people immediately around you. And you also can't hear your neighbors because the sound is revved up as high as it can go, to a point where it literally vibrates your sternum. And so you can't see your neighbor, you can't hear your neighbor. And likewise, it kind of greatly diminishes the agency of the congregation itself, placing the worship service almost entirely in the hands of just a few worship leaders and kind of some tech crew in some tech, the production designers in the tech booth. And so I just don't think that that's a type of atmosphere that can fulfill the telos of sacred atmosphere, as I mentioned earlier. I'm not doubting the sincerity of the people who attend those services and are worshiping. So and this is why I think that the telos that I offered is helpful as an analysis. So you have those 3 things: love God, love neighbor, love all creation. I don't doubt that they love God. I'm sure whenever they're in those worship spaces that they are worshiping God, and that they love God. And so I'm not saying that they aren't doing that. I'm just saying that I believe it's neglecting the other, or not adequately fostering and encouraging the other two aspects of loving one's neighbor and loving all creation, because it just is so separating from the other people that are around you. And it's a very kind of individualistic type of atmosphere. And likewise, in addition to that, I conducted interviews and surveys with people. And I also did, I read the research from professionals like Barna surveys, and people don't like this kind of atmosphere, is what everyone's coming to realize. Fog machines or like smoke machines and darkening the sanctuary and like these kind of movers and laser beams, they were the most universally lambasted thing within my survey. And this is from people who like attend those services. They would, oh gosh, I can't stand the fog machine. I can't stand this, these lights. They're really annoying to hit me in the eyes whenever I'm trying to worship. So yeah, like I couldn't find really anyone. The most positive thing that I would get from people about these types of services would be like, I mean, I guess it's fine. That's kind of the most positive. And they might like more of the contemporary style of worship, but it was kind of this additional aspect of, the fog machines and the darkened sanctuary. People were not fans of it. And so we are at this stage right now within church, not all churches, but it's becoming increasingly popular, where churches are constructing atmospheres that, one, people on average don't like, and two, it's theologically problematic, in my opinion, at least, because I don't think that one is being adequately encouraged to love one's neighbor when the atmosphere is completely blocking them from being perceived in any way. And the same goes for, love of all creation. I talk about that within my book of the way that a worship concert is kind of a world unto itself, if that makes sense. And if it doesn't, you can read my thesis. And as I talk about in my thesis as well, so much of this type of worship concert atmosphere used in our Sunday worship services is centered around creating and encouraging a type of hyper individualistic ecstasy, or as it's often called in the literature, an encounter, which I think is also problematic. Now, I know that this is something of controversial opinion. And so let me clarify that not all ecstasy is bad. So I'm not trying to shame you if you have kind of ecstatic religious experiences. It is a natural part of religious life for many people. And if you want to look at a good way that ecstasy can be used in worship, I encourage you to observe the worship practices, for instance, of many Black American churches. There's ecstasy that work, kind of an ecstatic experience that works within their services, but I don't think it's problematic at all. It works really well. But I've noticed an increasing trend in many churches where ecstasy is almost like a commodified religious experience that is being sold to people. And you can see this if you scroll through a lot of like social media on these different churches and advertisements that they have like up within their church spaces. They'll have pictures of like a person who's just in total, complete ecstasy, almost a limit experience, as Georges Bataille called it. And then it'll have, a caption that says something like worship experience, Sunday, 11 a.m. So it's kind of like marketing this type of extreme religious experience of like, you can come here and have this every week. And if we as Christians are focusing so much on ecstasy and encouraging that through the atmospheric techniques of secular music concerts, then I think there is a threat that we will end up missing out on being present to others in the everyday. And I'll turn to an illustration for what I mean by being present to others in the everyday. And this will kind of draw this long lecture to a conclusion, and hopefully we'll have some time for questions. So James McLaughlin records a story that illustrates this philosophy of being present to others in the everyday in the life of the famous Jewish philosopher Martin Buber. So Buber became enamored with mysticism and grew an enthusiasm for ecstatic religious experiences. And one day in the summer of 1914, when Buber was deep in prayer and mystical ecstasy, he was interrupted by a knock at his door. McLaughlin summarized the event as follows, quote, Buber said he was not present to the visitor in spirit. He was polite, even friendly with the man, but was also hoping to get back to his meditations. They spoke for a time and the young man left. Buber never saw him again. The man ended up dying at the front in World War I later on. And then later, Buber learned from a mutual friend that the young man had come to him that day in need. He had a question that he never asked, and Buber had not even attempted to discern that this might have been the visitor's purpose. Had he been present, Buber might have noticed. After that, Buber said he gave up on the religious and the sense of the exalted, exception, and enthusiastic. He says he gave it up for the everyday. Every moment demands that we be present to others. It is our responsibility. Fullness was not found out there, but rather in the present moment, with the present person, in the present world. Now, I understand that this story is rather extreme, and I'm not saying that, I don't mean to like scare you too much with that. And surely it is definitely possible to have ecstatic experiences and also be present in the everyday. Like I said, you can look at a lot of the tradition within the Black American church who do this really, really well. However, I do think that this story illustrates an important truth. If one is entirely consumed by the constant chase for the ecstatic and enthusiastic, one can end up distracted from the sacredness of the everyday, from the moments of care that occur when one is truly present to one's neighbor. There is a truth about love found in talking to one's elderly neighbor who lives alone, or from taking the time to befriend a shy child that cannot be found in mystical ecstasy. There's a truth about love to be found in those everyday experiences that one cannot learn through ecstasy. The sacredness of the everyday, likewise, I think, applies not just to one's interactions with other humans, but also to one's interactions with the broader scope of creation. There's a sacred beauty to be found even within a simple encounter with a caterpillar. Such a disposition is not to advocate pantheism, but rather an affirmation that all creation belongs to God, is loved by God, and is thus worthy of one's attention. This is a sacramental perception of the world, enabling one to find the deepest presence of Christ in crackers and wine, or the glory of the Holy Spirit in a small font of baptismal water. However, to embrace the ethics of the everyday, one will have to sacrifice excellence, efficiency, and competition, cultivating instead patience, participation, and cooperation. The demand for perfection within worship services, which is something that I hear a lot, actually. It's both in the literature and interviews and just in casual conversations with people. I hear echoed a lot of people saying, well, whatever we do in church, we need to do it to the best of our abilities. You know, if we're doing something, it needs to be excellent. I personally disagree.
I think that the demand for perfection within church services has become something of an idol. Church services do not need to be excellent, because I think that our own standards of excellence might very well be different from what God's standards of excellence are. Church needs to demonstrate the love of God, which might sound like a child fumbling through a reading of the Psalms, or an elderly man singing off key during the offering song. It is about, I think, as my colleague once said to me, it is about participation over perfection. We cannot get so lost in the well-oiled flow of a service that we end up leaving people behind. In all considerations of atmosphere, whether technological means, the intention of affect, or architectural concerns, churches must remember to always prioritize people over spaces. I think it would be tragic, even though I wrote a whole thesis on sacred atmospheres and atmospheres in church. I really do think it would be tragic if churches were to take an atmospheric turn and become so consumed with questions of space that they end up neglecting the people who traverse those spaces and the theological content with which they engage. Thinking theologically about space and atmosphere brings up questions of vital importance, such as the fostering of dispositions, power relations, ideological reinforcement, and especially inclusivity for people with disabilities, which is a very spatially, architecturally oriented question. But an atmosphere can never receive the gospel on one's behalf. An atmosphere can never love one's neighbor on one's behalf. An atmosphere cannot mitigate climate change, deforestation, animal abuse, or systemic racial injustice. As I've talked about, I think atmospheres can certainly encourage the mitigation of those things, or it can encourage one to receive the gospel or to love one's neighbor. But human agents empowered by the Holy Spirit are ultimately responsible for such work. Thus, no matter what the atmospheric conditions, churches must always maintain the core mission of loving God, loving neighbor, and loving all creation. Thank you. And I think that we are just about out of time. We have like one more minute. Is there any question or anything in the chat? Questions, comments? Yes.
In this day and age, finances seem to be a big component of everything. How are things rigged atmospherically to try and bring the more money in?
Okay, so the question is, because finances, that's a great question, actually, and there's a fascinating answer, or at least fascinating example. The question was about finances are very important in church. So is there a way that churches sometimes rig the atmosphere in order to encourage more donation? Is that an adequate summary? Yes, so churches sometimes do this. I attended one church service in my hometown. I won't say a name, but I went to the service, and this is somewhat heartbreaking, because if you look at the people who were in the service, this was hands down the most racially diverse church that I went into. This was the most it was the most diverse amongst class. So you had people from all different, like, working class, upper class, everything in the middle, and so forth. So congregationally, it was like, whoa, this is, exciting. And so I was in this service, and they had a worship concert aesthetic as well. And this was probably the best band that I heard in my research, or at least it was my personal favorite. They were phenomenal. And it was like a 40-minute worship set at least. Each song was about like 15 minutes long. They played like 3 different songs. They were 15 minutes long, and they did a lot of what is called spontaneous worship, which is you might be able to think it was like worship jazz kind of their like kind of improvising on the spot, and they'll like come up with a chorus, and people are chant it. They were really good, and they had I attended with a friend, and she told me that like their sound design board was something like $50,000 to $100,000 of like this production design tech, and so like highest quality industry and everything, and people were ecstatic, in this service. There's, and I'm not even trying to exactly shame this. There's like speaking in tongues around me. There's people just like on the ground weeping, and so forth during this service. And then that comes to close. People go back to their seats, and the lights go up just a little bit, and everything's kind of hazy, and has this kind of dream-like ethereal atmosphere. And the person comes up and starts to then give a mini sermon / introduction to tithing, about how if you plant this seed of faith now, God is going to multiply it, and you'll see it grow, and so forth. And what I think, and based on what I've done research on this church, it's a highly problematic church, and I knew that going into it. They've gotten in trouble for lots of stuff, and so this kind of ended up being, this is harsh, and maybe I'm wrong about this, and I'm not saying this about the people who were there. I'm sure that they were incredibly sincere, but knowing some of the people who are at the top, I think this ended up kind of being a little bit of a way of scamming people out of their money, and this kind of and the way that worked is they set up the atmospheric techniques to kind of break down the self. It's getting to that sense of ecstasy. It is this kind of outside of oneself, and it kind of disrupts one's sense of self and individuation. And then so the question, you're disrupted by an atmosphere. And so then the question is, into what narrative are you being reconstituted? Into what narrative are you being put back together, so to speak? And that is when sometimes danger can come about, because it's maybe not that dangerous if the pastor is like, all right, y'all, we really need to start focusing on loving Jesus with our whole hearts, and loving our neighbors, and loving all creation. It's something like, then it's kind of like, okay, it's really not that bad, clearly within scripture and everything. But whenever it's like, please give us your money, that can be a type of manipulation, I think. So that is one instance that I saw in which the atmospheric techniques were definitely used to get money, because they were trying to build for they had different projects that they were trying to do, but also this is just historically a very pro prosperity gospel type of church. Does that make sense?
What you had time to share with us thus far is mostly what we see, what we hear. And I'm wondering, in your thesis, do you have space or time to ponder touch? How are you in a reclining chair like in a a plush massage parlor, a movie theater, or a hard pew? What does it smell like? What are other sensations?
Right. Thank you. Yes, that is a great question. I don't get as deep into that. I probably should, but those are certainly important facets of atmosphere. And in my opinion, we need to replace every chair and pew in church with like one of those vibrating massage chairs. That would be amazing. But yes, so things like, are you sitting in pews? Or are you sitting in individual chairs? That can communicate something about like, sometimes pews can communicate a little bit more of like a communal feel, right? We're all sharing this one kind of seat together. But also things like temperature in a room. Is the room cold? Is it hot? So one thing that like worship concerts will often do is they'll be cold. Just slightly, not too much. You have to have like the perfect amount of being cold, just enough to make goosebumps. Because this is perhaps a pejorative take. Maybe someone else can have a more positive take on this. But whenever we experience kind of ecstasy and rapture, or even if you see somebody that you love, what happens, right? You get goosebumps. And it's exciting and so forth. But like ecstasy or fervor can give us these goosebumps. And so if you make the temperature cold enough, then you got the goosebumps. And then so it's kind of it can be a way of artificially inducing that. But yeah, there's also just factors like taste. Even what does the Eucharist taste like in your service? And there's certain memories that go along with that because taste is such a powerful thing. If the Eucharist kind of has a unique quality of taste to it whenever to like that particular church, then you might recall past instances of taking the Eucharist. So take the Eucharist and it kind of brings up different memories perhaps for you. Like smells also can be strongly associated with a particular. So yeah, those are all important as well. Well, it's just like this is kind of touch, but like how one's body is interacting with the space. So like in different high liturgical settings, like you'll like stand, sit, kneel a lot, and it has those are all different physical sensations that can contribute to the atmosphere. So the kneeling, like what is done, and I think like Catholic services, I know like Anglicans and Episcopalians often do this, is whenever they're consecrating the Eucharist, you'll kneel and say, the Agnus Dei or something like that. Lamb of God, you take away the sins of the world, have mercy on us. And you do that while kneeling. And so like that kind of bodily disposition of an entire, especially one done amongst an entire group of people, can change one's relationship to the Eucharist. Whereas maybe like also, are you like bowing during, the time? So all those things influence, those are kind of tactile ways that influence the atmosphere. And I'm so sorry, we're almost out of time. I'm going to drop my email in the chat. So feel free to email me if you would like to read my thesis. Again, it's also on the chapel's website. Thank you so much for this time, for being here, for listening to my work. I deeply appreciate it. Blessings.
Thank you.
Great job.